It started with a simple alert. At midnight, Eastern Time, the United States announced it was severing all ties with Canada, effective immediately. The world's longest undefended border became a hard wall. All trade, travel, and cooperation ceased. No one saw it coming, no warnings, no talks, just a sudden shocking declaration. On February 1, 2026, Americans and Canadians woke up to a new reality. Partners turned strangers overnight. The news spread like wildfire. Disbelief gave way to panic as government websites confirmed the truth. Official statements were cold and brief, citing vague reasons of national security and economic independence. For millions, the reasons didn't matter. What mattered was the chaos. The friendly relationship that defined North America vanished, replaced by uncertainty and fear. In border towns, the change was instant. A commute to work became impossible. Family visits across the river were out of the question. Bridges and tunnels, once symbols of friendship, now marked division. Police and military enforced the new border. The daily rhythm of life halted. The silence at bustling crossings was deafening, the sound of a partnership ending. Newsrooms scrambled to make sense of it. Analysts warned of catastrophic consequences. The US and Canada weren't just neighbors. Their economies, power grids, and security were intertwined. Cutting those ties was like tearing apart roots that had grown together for generations. Experts called it an act of self-harm, on a scale never seen before. The world watched, holding its breath, as the first effects rippled across the continent. For border communities, the impact was immediate and personal. The easy flow of people and goods stopped cold. The partnership that kept North America running was gone. The shock was total, the consequences just beginning. The world's trust in stability had been shattered overnight. The silence at the border was more than absence. It was a warning. A way of life had ended, and no one knew what would come next. The first major impact was felt in the dark. The US and Canada share a power grid. When the connection was severed, the grid faltered. Blackouts swept through New York, New England, and central Canada. Cities went dark. Homes went cold. The energy people took for granted vanished, exposing their dependence on their northern neighbor. At the same time, grocery stores faced a crisis. America's winter produce, beef, and key food items from Canada stopped at the border. Within hours, shelves emptied, milk and meat dwindled. Panicked shoppers rushed to buy whatever was left. The supply chain, a delicate system, broke at its most critical link. Canada faced the same problem. Without US imports, Canadian stores ran out of fruits, vegetables, and essentials. But it wasn't just food. All goods stopped. Car parts, medical supplies, construction materials. Trucks and trains sat idle, stranded at the border. The economic heartbeat of the continent flatlined. By the end of the first day, the reality was clear. This was a full-blown crisis. The lights were out. Food was running low. Supply chains were broken. Government pleas for calm rang hollow. People stared at empty shelves and dark streets, feeling vulnerable. The simple act of closing a border triggered a cascade of failures. The partnership with Canada wasn't just about treaties, it was about the basics of life. Power, food, and goods had always flowed freely. Now, they were gone. The cost of isolation was immediate and personal. The crisis was no longer abstract. It was in every home, every store, every street. The partnership had been invisible until it disappeared. Now, everyone felt its absence. Day 2 began with silence in America's industrial heartland. The auto industry, built on cross-border supply chains, was the first to fall. Factories in Michigan and Ohio, reliant on Canadian parts, stopped cold. Assembly lines halted. Thousands of workers were sent home. The shutdown rippled outward. Steel mills, plastics companies, trucking firms, all hit by the sudden stop. Wall Street panicked. Stocks for automotive, manufacturing, and transportation companies plummeted. The Dow Jones suffered one of its worst drops in history. Retirement savings vanished in hours. The world saw America's decision not as strength, but as economic self-destruction. Beyond the economy, security vulnerabilities appeared. The US and Canada's joint defense systems, like NORAD, fractured overnight. Who was watching the skies? How would threats be detected? The nation was not only economically weaker but less safe. The decision to go it alone created dangerous blind spots. The collapse of partnership exposed just how much America relied on its neighbor. The cost was measured in lost jobs, lost security, and lost confidence. The damage was spreading fast, and there was no end in sight. America's strength had always come from connection. Now, it was unraveling. The statistics told one story, but the true cost was human. Families living on opposite sides of the border were suddenly torn apart. A daughter in Buffalo could no longer care for her parents in Ontario. A father in Seattle couldn't see his children in Vancouver. These were not distant relatives. They were part of each other's daily lives. Now, an invisible wall separated them. Job losses were immediate and devastating. Factory workers, truck drivers, waitresses, hotel managers, all affected. Small, businesses lost customers overnight. Millions faced financial ruin. Prices for food and gas soared. With Canadian imports gone, supplies dwindled and costs skyrocketed. Families had to choose between food, gas, or rent. The social fabric began to fray. Anger and frustration grew. Protests erupted, especially in northern states. The government's promise of strength felt like betrayal. Trust between citizens and leaders eroded. The human cost was written on the faces of separated families and jobless workers. The gamble had failed ordinary people most of all. By week's end, the crisis became one of trust. People no longer believed their leaders. Government reassurances rang hollow. Blackouts continued. Shelves stayed empty. Unemployment soared. Every promise of recovery was met with anger. The business world lost faith. The stock market kept falling. Hiring and investment froze. The web of commerce built on trust was in tatters. Internationally, America's reputation was destroyed. Allies looked elsewhere for security and trade. The U.S., once a champion of open trade, was now seen as unpredictable and unreliable. Political fallout was intense. Governors defied the federal government. The nation was deeply divided. Some clung to nationalism, but most saw catastrophe. Political infighting paralyzed any response. The chaos was now economic, social, and political. America's foundation of trust, at home and abroad, had crumbled. Weeks turned into a month. The chaos became a grim new normal. America was now a fortress, isolated by its own choice. The vibrant exchange of ideas, culture, and people vanished. Universities lost Canadian students and professors. Scientific and artistic collaborations ended. The economy settled into deep recession. Unemployment and inflation persisted. The promise of independence became a reality of decline. On the world stage, America's isolation was complete. Allies formed new partnerships, excluding the U.S. The U.S. dollar lost its status as the world's reserve currency. America's power and influence faded, not from enemies, but from its own choices. Global challenges became harder to face alone. The nation was surrounded not by enemies, but by former friends. The cost of abandoning partnership was a diminished place in the world. While America isolated itself, Canada faced its own crisis. The shock was severe: job losses, shortages, economic pain. But Canada chose a different path. Resilience and new partnerships. The government acted quickly, retooling factories and redirecting trade. Canada fast-tracked agreements with Europe, the UK, and Pacific nations. The world, wary of America, welcomed Canada as a stable partner. Canadian ports boomed as trade bypassed the US. Forced to stand alone, Canada forged a new, independent identity. It became a leading voice for cooperation and innovation. The crisis made Canada more self-reliant and globally connected. In a twist, Canada became a model of stability. America, once the superpower, was now isolated. Canada's new dawn proved that strength comes from building bridges, not walls. The world didn't stand still as America retreated. The abandonment of Canada sent shockwaves through the global order. Allies in Europe and Asia felt betrayed, questioning their own security. A dangerous power vacuum emerged. China and Russia seized the opportunity, offering new partnerships to America's former allies. The global balance of power shifted, becoming more fragmented and competitive. International institutions like NATO and the UN weakened without US leadership. European nations accelerated plans for their own defense. The US dollar's dominance faded as trade blocs used other currencies. Global supply chains were rebuilt around new hubs. The world learned to operate without the US, leaving America further behind. The cost of isolation was global instability, and America's own irrelevance. This story is a warning. In our interconnected world, no nation is an island. Strength comes from partnership, not isolation. The collapse of the US-Canada relationship shows this with painful clarity. The bonds between nations are lifelines, not chains. Cutting them is self-destruction, not strength. Strong partnerships create resilience and security. Trust is the currency of a stable world, and it can be lost overnight. Rebuilding trust takes decades, if it can be done at all. Relationships between nations, like between people, must be nurtured. The friendship between the US and Canada was a remarkable achievement. The lesson is simple: we are stronger together. Partnership and mutual respect are the foundations of a safe, prosperous future.